Hey everyone, it's Colt. In this video, I want to run through some of my favorite VS Code extensions, but first I have to be a really annoying YouTuber and ask you to please subscribe if you don't. Please like this video if you do, but also if you don't, just like it, please. It's really easy. And turn on notifications if you want to be able to participate in future polls. This video was one of the most requested from those polls, so that's why I made it. So if you'd like to participate, turn notifications on, leave comments, try not to be rude and offensive, and try not to bully me very much. I've been spending a lot of time crying in the corner about my comments. And I guess that's it, huh? All right, well, let's get started. So, some of you probably already know this. I used to be really into Sublime Text. That's what I told everyone to use. I have jumped ship to VS Code. Visual Studio Code, it's put out by Microsoft. It's totally free. It's cross-platform. It's great for a bunch of reasons. I'm not going to go into many, but probably my favorite feature, the single thing it's better at compared to Sublime Text, is the way you add and interact with extensions. It has a great marketplace for extensions. It has a GUI and a user interface for installing them and removing them and pausing them. Highly recommend it. So that's what we're talking about in this video, extensions. But actually the first thing I'm going to talk about is something that comes pre-installed. You don't have to install it. It's not really an extension. It's something called Emmet. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. It helps with creating HTML tags really quickly. It's a nice syntax. It gets kind of complicated, honestly. But right off the bat, if you make an HTML file and you start typing simple HTML tags, most editors support things like H1 tab will give you an H1 element. But where Emmet comes in is you can do things like H1, well, let's not do an H1. Let's say I have a UL and then I want 5 list elements. I can do li times 5 and hit tab, and it makes 5 of them. So that's a really simple example, but you can do all sorts of things with the syntax. You can make child elements. You can do siblings. You can do something called climbing up. You can also do grouping and multiplication, which I just showed you. Here's an example of grouping. This is not a video going into the detail of it. I could probably do that another time if there's interest. But if we take this single line and we expand it, we get a whole bunch of HTML very quickly, as you can see. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about Emmet. Again, it's not a tutorial on it. You don't have to install it, but I use it all the time. Next up, let's talk about the theme and icons that I like to use. The theme I like is called Material Theme. I'm not alone. I think it's one of the most popular. So if you don't know how to install extensions, by the way, it's this icon over here. This is the easiest way. You can do it all through the text and command line, but this is way better. So you just search for an extension, or you can look at the recommended ones. There's actually a website you can go to browse the most popular, but it's called Material. I already have it installed, but if I didn't have it installed, I would just click install. But this is not Material UI that we're looking at right here. This is quite ugly in my opinion. Sorry to the team who developed it. So to enable it, for me at least, since I've disabled it, I can click enable. And if we look at the documentation, there's a couple of options. So there's does this show them down here? It doesn't actually show it, does it? Well, there's a dark one. There's this lighter purpley gray. There's this gray greenish one. I don't know if that's green at all. A light color, another dark one. There's different variants, but I'm going to reload. I've installed it now, and you'll see that my colors change, the background changes, all this changes. So if you want to change the one that it uses, I believe it's Command K and T. There we go. And it opens up this little drop down, and you can select from the available themes. Some of them are built in, like Colorizer, I think, and this one, Light Visual Studio. Oh, I'm blinded there. It's not so good. But we can go to Material Theme, darker, high contrast. I think the one that nope, that's not the one. Pale Night, is that the one? Yes, this is the one that I like. Let me just see if I also use the high contrast. I think so. Okay. So this is the theme that I like to use. It's Material UI. Another extension I use all the time, at least when I'm making websites, mainly HTML and CSS heavy projects, I use Live Server. So Live Server allows you to edit in one window and have it automatically update and refresh with every time you save in another window. So here's a simple HTML file. Here's a CSS file. Actually, they're not linked together. Whoops, let's do that now, app.css. And if I open this up right now, the first thing that's kind of annoying is that you have to go and find this file on your computer and double click it. And I always hate doing that, especially if you work in a bunch of nested directories. So that's another reason I end up using Live Server. It's just faster. So I go to extensions, type in Live Server, and here it is. I'm going to install it, and you can read the documentation here. Whenever you install an extension, you do need to reload the window or the workspace. I think that's the terminology they use. And I'm going to save, and once I install it and reload the workspace, I can go to an HTML file and say open with live server. And it automatically opens it up in the browser, the default browser for me, which is Chrome. It has a server started, and I can see my code. But of course, what's most important about it, this is kind of annoying, let me shrink this down so we can see it, is that as I change something, let's say I change them to purple, Undisputed King of Colors, I save, and everything updates. So I use this all the time for a couple reasons, like I already mentioned. It will open it up, that's nice and easy, but also to have this live connection so you don't have to constantly save and refresh. Okay, that's all there is to live server. And to stop it, just go to stop live server, like that. And we're done. While we're on the topic of HTML and CSS, one of my favorite extensions when I'm working with long, complicated CSS files in particular is called CSS Peek. So what this does is it allows you to quickly jump from your HTML to your CSS, either jumping to a separate file or a separate window, or by popping up, I think that's where the peek comes from, popping up a little preview. It's not even a preview, that's the wrong term. A little mini window that allows you to edit the CSS without changing windows. So if we go to install it, it's called CSS Peek. Oh, it's right there. No, where'd it go? Come back. Okay. Whoops, Peek with 2 E's. I'm going to install it. Okay, so it finished installing. I have a really simple demo here where I have an ID that I'm using and then a class that I'm using and then some corresponding styles. So what I can do, the first way of using this is to highlight or just select or, I don't know, cursor over one of the, let's say the ID. And if I want to see the corresponding CSS that is styling this element with that ID, I can just type F12. And it takes me right here, and my cursor is automatically in the right spot. Same thing with the class, F12, and it takes me to the file. So that's one way of doing it. But what I could also do is open it in this little peek window where I still type F12, but also with option. And it opens up this little window here. I'm still in the index.html file, but I can actually edit it. So if I want to edit something about it, I'm not just looking at the CSS, I can fully change something. So I could say, I don't know, border or something, and save it, and those changes would take effect without me ever leaving this window. And then you can hit escape to get out of it. So it's a nice quick way of, if you have like a 500-line CSS file, it's so annoying to scroll or to do Command F to search for something, this is really nice to jump back and forth. Okay, that's CSS Peek. Another extension that I really like, it also has to do with color, is called Color Highlight. And it's really simple. All that it does is it will take color RGB values or hex values for colors and highlight them with the actual color that they are. So for example, if I'm working on a project and I have a list, an array of colors, or I don't know, I'm working in a CSS file and I have colors, it's really easy to lose track of what is what. So Color Highlight is going to highlight these colors with the actual color they represent. So we can go and install it really easily. I just do a search, Color Highlight. This is all sort of contrived because I uninstalled everything. But anyway, go and install and reload. And there we go. They're automatically highlighted. Now you can change how this works. This can be a little overwhelming. One of the options that I like, if you open up the settings, Command comma, or you go to Preferences, Settings, if you go to Extensions, Color Highlight, Marker Type right here, you can change it to dot-before, which looks like this, where it just puts the color right in front. That's the one I usually go with, but you can also do, what else is there? Background, so that's the default. Outline, a lot of people, I see this one often. It gets kind of annoying if you have colors stacked on top of one another. Like if you had something like this, they kind of blend into one another, so I don't like that as much. But there's a bunch of options, and so I definitely implore you, is that the right term? Implore you to explore the different options. Oh, my cat is jumped on my desk. Oh my God. All right, well, she made quite the entrance there and exit. So that's Color Highlight. It's really simple, but I really get a lot of use out of it just because it's really not easy to keep track of these color values. If you're not using variables, if you're not using something like Sass, it can get very difficult and frustrating. So I recommend it. The next extension I like to use is called Bracket Pair Colorizer. It's really simple, but I actually get a lot of use out of it. So it does exactly what it sounds like. It takes your brackets in different programming languages and will colorize them so that you can match them. So VS Code already does this sort of highlight, but I sometimes find that it's not ideal, especially when I'm teaching. It's not exactly that clear, like up on a projector screen or something. So if you search for Bracket Pair Colorizer, there's a couple of them actually, so you may prefer some of the other colors. Oh, this is Colorizer 2. Actually, that one sounds like I've been using Colorizer on its own without Colorizer 2. I'm behind on the times. So you just install it like every other extension, reload, and then if I go back to this JavaScript file, you'll see my brackets are now different colors. So you can change these colors, but this opening bracket up here closes down there, and they're the same color, and you get this nice line showing you that they match. Same thing here. So some of you may not like this, but I appreciate this because, well, for a bunch of reasons. But when you work on a bunch of nested stuff, it can often be a pain to find like where's the corresponding bracket here, especially if you're not indenting everything properly as you go. Often what I do is just ignore indentation for a little bit and then use a Prettier or Prettifier to take care of it for me, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. But before I've indented things, I often find myself getting lost in brackets, so the bracket matching is very nice. Oh, and as far as changing the colors of the brackets, if you open up your settings, Command, comma, or I believe Control, comma on a PC, or just go to Preferences, Settings, under Extensions here, if you click on Bracket Pair Colorizer and scroll down, there's a couple different modes for how it does the colorization. You can read about that in the documentation. But if you click Colors, Edit in Settings.json, it takes you to the right place. So if you haven't seen this window before, the left side are the default values that you override. So you can actually edit these colors, but on the right side, you can. So I believe there's 3 colors that it wants. In my settings, I have 4 because I was playing around with, I'm always tweaking these. Whenever I get stuck with something in programming or I'm having trouble with a project, I'll just decide to go tweak colors and play around. As you can tell, I don't really have a very nice, quiet color palette. I like to play around with things, and I'm not really trying to say that this looks great, but I don't know. I like playing around with colors. So it's Bracket Pair Colorizer 2.colors. Make sure you add a comma in if you are overriding it over here. So anytime you're trying to add a new setting, this is just JSON. So yeah, we add that in and we override the values. So these are the colors that I'm using. And whatever I change this to, like if I cut this out and I just change it to be white, you'll see immediately all my brackets turn white, even in the settings file. And if I go to my JavaScript file, my parens, my curly braces, my square brackets, they're all white. So go back to settings here and put whatever colors you want in there. And the order definitely matters as well. You can see I have this blue color first. And if we take a look, all my parens and sort of top level brackets are blue. And then the next nesting inside is this green color. And then inside of that is this pink, purpley, whatever color that is, fuchsia. All right, so that's how you can change those colors. Next up, I'd like to talk about snippets. So I'm not going to run through every snippet extension that I use because it really varies on what I'm doing. So I'm just going to talk about the one that I use the most. Recently, I've been doing a lot of JavaScript and some React. So I use the ES7 React snippet package. So if you go to extensions, if you just search for ES7, I think it should pop up right here. It has quite the long title. ES7 React, Redux, GraphQL, React Native. It gets cut off. JS, ES7 syntax, TypeScript. There's a lot of snippets in here. And if you scroll down, it shows you the prefix that you type and then what you'll get. So some of these are just basic things like import and exports, creating promises. I use that one a lot. I really don't like typing this. Actually, this one is stupid to me, a comment block. You can do that a lot faster without having to remember that. But then for React specific stuff, I use these all the time. There's a lot of boilerplate, whether you know React or not. And like in many frameworks, there's a ton of boilerplate you type up for every piece of every component in React. So there's a lot of this stuff that I just have memorized. For example, anytime I make a new component, I type IMRC to import React up at the top. Anytime that I'm making a new component, I want to add in a render method to it, you can type REN somewhere. Here we go. And it does the empty render method for you. There's a lot of these in here. I don't really use React Native very much, but there's a bunch of these prefixes and you can explore them here. The point is, whatever you're doing, whether it's in Python or Java or JavaScript or within some framework like Angular or React, there's a snippet library out there and it's probably going to save you a lot of time. You might have to put a little work in, like 5 minutes, into memorizing the actual prefixes you need. But I've installed this now. Oh no, I haven't. That's a lie. Now I've installed it. And just to show you some basics, here's an empty file. If I was creating a React component, I would do rcc tab. And it gives me this boilerplate where it imports everything, it creates my class, and it also adds in the export default. I actually sometimes like to do that on a separate line down at the bottom. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Things that aren't React specific, like I said, promise, that's nice and easy. There's things like then, create a then catch. There's a bunch of them. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I definitely recommend using snippets and learning them. It's not enough just to install the snippets because you'll never actually use them if you don't take the time to remember or to memorize and then remember them later on. Okay, so that's just my little note about snippets. Use them. So that brings me to the last extension I'll cover, which is called Prettier Now. It is a prettifier. Prettifier. I think that's how you say it. It formats your code. You can set the rules. You can use the default rules. There's a file you can set up that specifies how it should work. So let me just show it to you. First, if we go to extensions, if you just search for pretty, come on. There's a couple of them. There's actually more than a couple. There's a ton of them. I like Prettier Now. Honestly, the reason I chose it is that the most popular one had only 4 out of 5 stars, and this one had 5. And this one gives you a little more flexibility. So if you click install, which I've already done, then enable it, just like before, we'll reload. The other thing I should point out, you can have this run, have it prettify your code on demand. So you basically tell it to run, you execute it, or you can have it run every time you save. So if you want to do on save, if you want it to run when you save, they have instructions in here, but basically there's just a single preference, a little checkbox you check, editor.format save or format on save. So if you do command comma, or you go up to your preferences in the menu, I just like to search for it, editor.format, can't type here, format on save right there. If you uncheck it, it won't automatically prettify your code when you save. If you do check it, it will. And then if we do an example here, here's something simple. Let's say that all of this is screwed up indentation wise. As soon as I save, it returns to the previous state. Another thing you can configure, it's up to you, but if I have some random object, let's say obj equals this nested object, and I have a couple of objects in there, so we'll say like person corresponds to this, I don't know, first name is called, something like this. When I hit save, it adds those spaces in there for me. I believe you can configure that. Also, another thing you can configure is to have the colons align in a multi-line object. So if I save, it will format things so that those colons align. That's a preference that you can check. Another thing, just to wrap up, if you have like a really long single line argument or a single line function call or conditional, you can set a limit for that line length and it will split things up automatically. So let's say I'm console.logging some really long function calls. Okay, this is absurd, but let's say it looks like this. As I save, oops, I didn't save. There we go. It splits it up automatically onto separate lines and it takes care of indenting it and doing everything for you. So there's a lot to like about Prettify. Again, I could really just unindent all of this and then save and it goes back. So Prettier Now is the one I use. There's preferences. There's a lot to the documentation, honestly, if you read it. Here's a list of the preferences that you can set up, how you want it to handle quotes, if you want trailing commas to be there, if they should be removed or added, how brackets should be spaced. There's a lot of these that have default values, but you can change them. And then, of course, you can set up a file with your own rules. All right, so that's a run through of some of my favorite extensions. By no means that all the extensions I've ever used, but those are the ones that I thought were worth talking about, at least as far as front-end development is concerned. So I didn't really touch on anything around Python, so I'll probably do a separate video on that. But those are the extensions I like. I don't know what to say anymore. Subscribe, please. Like this video. And comment, I guess, if you have any other extensions that you like or that you think my students should know about or that I should know about. Comment, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say. All right, thanks for watching.